This is Standard Office Procedures, the podcast that helps professionals live and grow through culture, communication, and candor.
This just in.
We're here. We're back. That was a Shannon intro, and we're back with another episode of Standard Office Procedures. I'm your host, Grace, and here with me in the studio, as always, is my co-host, Shannon. Say hi, Shannon.
Hello.
And today we're talking about personalities in the workplace.
Ooh, we got some of those.
Specifically, we're talking about the differences between introverts and extroverts, which is going to be an exciting topic. I'm glad that we're doing this together because I'm an extrovert and you are an introvert.
That is very true.
So I feel like we have some perspective on either side of the fence here.
I do too.
I'm excited. Are you excited?
I'm so excited.
So we're going to talk a little bit about how to work best with introverts and extroverts. Maybe you're managing them. Maybe you just work with a lot of different personality types. I think it is worth mentioning that, you know, about 70% of people fall kind of in the middle of the spectrum where you have you can be a little bit of both, you know, but then you do have some cases where people are pretty severely introverted or pretty severely extroverted. So we're just going to kind of cover the spectrum of differences. So let's get started.
Let's go.
Let's first define the difference between an introvert and an extrovert, because I think that a lot of us, you know, when you hear introvert or extrovert, you just assume an introvert is shy and an extrovert is really talkative and social. And that's not quite it. You can have a very social introvert and you can have a quieter extrovert. Whether or not you're an introvert or extrovert has everything to do with how you recharge, right? So if you're an introverted person, being around a lot of people, in a social setting can kind of fatigue you, and you recharge your batteries by going and having some alone time to kind of just decompress and be by yourself and be alone with your thoughts. Whereas extroverted people, that we recharge by being around people. So if I'm left alone too long by myself, I feel depleted, I need to get back around people. So it's very much about how you kind of regain your energy. And like I said, you know, I think that the sort of the fallacy of, if you're an introvert, you're really quiet or you're really shy or you don't like people, you know, that's all kind of outdated and not accurate.
I think there are definitely shy introverts.
Sure.
I mean, there are just shy people in general. Or it could be situational. Like maybe you're not particularly shy in your home life, but when you get in work or around certain people, you kind of draw into yourself a little more.
Yeah.
And so I think some people use shy and introverts as interchangeable things, and they're really not. Because I would say, like you were saying, I'm a pretty outgoing person,
yes,
in the workplace, and I'll talk to people. I'm not shy, but I get drained. Like right now I'm going through a period of time where I don't have a ton of downtime by myself to recharge, and that is making me struggle. On the flip side of that, that's going on for my whole family, right? My husband is a major extrovert, and he's having the best time.
Living his best life.
It's just he feels so energized and happy and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting. I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I think those are definitely two different things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just like Shannon said. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking well, you know, that's not me, just know that there's a lot of nuance here. So it's less about how you present and more about how you recharge. So we're going to talk about how these different personality types approach work, how they perform at their best, and why each type plays an integral part in any office setting. So I do think that there's a misconception that, you know, one type is better than the other. And we're going to kind of touch on that later and just be that's a misconception.
I also think there's a misconception that one type is more common than the other.
Yes.
I think there's a misconception that there's just so many more extroverts than there are introverts. And I don't think that's true, because I think it is so easy to label a shy person as being an introvert. And we think, well, that's the only introvert person I know. I think there's a lot of people that think that I am an extrovert.
Yeah.
And that's not true, right? So I would say it's probably a lot more evenly split, wouldn't you think?
It is. No, research actually shows that over 50% of people by a little bit are introverts. So actually, and this is obviously according to all kinds of data, but there are more introverts than extroverts in the world. However, like we were saying a moment ago, people will mistake a social introvert for an extrovert because of the lack of understanding of what those terms mean. So had I not known Shannon a little bit better, I would have assumed she must be more extroverted than introverted, because again, if Shannon's in a room, you're hardly a wallflower, you know? Yeah. But
I love attention. Don't get me wrong.
But only when I want it, and then I want everyone to go away.
Exactly.
So yeah, just keep that in mind. But yeah, you're right. It is a pretty even split. I just think that there's a lot of misunderstandings about it. So let's talk about introverts first. I think, again, like that sort of common conception of them as shyer or quiet or antisocial. That's rooted in some fact because introverts are the quieter type, but it's not because they don't have something to say or because they lack the confidence to say it. They're generally just more introspective and they process information internally. So if they're thinking about something or if they're trying to mull over an idea or come up with a solution to a problem or engineer something, they're generally doing this all kind of in their own heads quietly. So they generally need this solitude or just solitude in general to do their best work and also to recharge when they've been drained of emotional energy from things like meetings. If you're a workplace that you have a lot of meetings, and these can be in person and over Zoom, right? That counts as extroverting.
Oh, I find Zoom meetings even more exhausting because I feel like I'm, especially for video.
Yeah.
I mean, not necessarily for audio, but for video because I'm like on display and I have to look a certain way and I have to be I have to show that I'm in tune with what's going on.
Paying attention.
Oh God, that's exhausting.
Exactly. And I think that even if it's no video, like having to just stay really plugged in because what you don't want is for somebody to call your name and you're like, what?
Sorry, what?
Yeah, exactly. So, that's a lot of socializing for someone who maybe gets tired from socializing. So if you have meetings, whether remotely or in person, your more introverted colleagues might need some time to recuperate from them. So they might go to their desks and put their headphones on and just take some time to think about what they were, working on or just decompress. I think that's just a key thing to remember about introverts is that they're not shy. They're not quiet. Right. They may be, right? I'm just saying like in general, that's not what makes an introvert an introvert. An introvert is somebody who they need to take a break from people and they need to process things within their own minds.
I think sometimes I struggle with this in meetings with people that are very extroverted if we're working through a problem together or spitballing ideas because they'll just work through it externally and on the cuff, or was it off the cuff?
Off the cuff. I like
off the cuff.
On the cuff, whatever.
And so it's not that I can't do that. It's just I really like to think through what I'm going to say or like kind of take some of it in before I say it. And so it can be really hard if things are moving at a really fast pace. It's not that I'm not keeping up. It's that I don't have time to form my own thing to say. Right? Before I'm asked to give it, and that can be hard.
That flows really well into what we're going to talk about in just a moment, which is like how to kind of help your introverts work best. But before we go to that, I thought this was an interesting fact is that they've done a lot of research about what's the biological difference between introverts and extroverts? Like, why are we this way? And a lot of research has proven that introverts require less dopamine to feel happy than extroverts. So like introverts in general are kind of more self-contained and can be happy on their own with less external stimulation than extroverts who have more dopamine receptors, so require more dopamine to feel that like joy.
It's fascinating.
Isn't that interesting?
I would like to see a brain scan report on the chemistry of my brain levels.
MRI, please. We'll get to that next episode when we have MRIs with Grace and Shannon. That's not true.
You think an MRI will tell me the brain chemical level that I have?
Is that how science works?
How it works. No.
Hey, don't listen to anything we're saying about science. All right, so let's talk about how to make sure your introverts are, feeling their most productive and feeling the most comfortable at work. One way is to make sure that you don't have a ton of very large meetings with introverts if you want to hear what they have to say. Because introverts tend to open up and be a bit more forthcoming and comfortable in groups of 2 or 3 rather than big boardrooms full of tons of people. As you can imagine, if you're somebody who gets a bit drained from socializing, having to speak publicly in front of a lot of people can be nerve-wracking for introverts. Again, not saying that they can't do it or they're not just as capable, but I just think it takes a bit of more of a toll than on an extrovert.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I have found sometimes with introverts, with me or with other people that I know are introverts at work, it's not that they're not going to speak up in front of a big group of people, but it's probably only going to be if they feel strongly about something. So again, if you're kind of wanting to spitball and throw ideas out, getting them to do that in front of a big group of people is probably not the most productive. Yeah. But if it's something they feel strongly about, they may be more likely to speak up.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And kind of to that, as the kind of like an accompaniment piece to that is that remember that most introverts they need some time to process before they can make a decision. So we actually just lost some audio there, but just like you were saying offline, Shannon, was that if you just sort of drop something in the lap of your introverted employees and you're expecting them to respond like extroverts, and you just have like an opinion right away, just say, oh, this is how I feel, knee jerk. That's unlikely to happen. And Shannon, you were kind of sharing your experience with that in the past with Owen.
Yeah, I think it's introverts typically have good thoughts. They need somebody to help nurture them into okay, how can we express this? And it can be tough when you have an extrovert that's maybe, I don't want to say impatient, but it can tend to be a little more impatient because they're like, just say what you think. Come on, I'm doing it. You do it, you know? And so I think if you can help, that can be a really tough thing for extroverts to wrap their heads around, I think, when working with an introvert, because they're like, just tell me what you think, right? But if you can help give them the space that they need, and that will help them do a better job of expressing their thoughts. Because I think sometimes they get so caught up in like the urgency of, okay, I need to come up with what I think right now. And that can make me not do my best work. Right?
Yeah. No, I'm really glad that you kind of brought up the comparison between introverts and extroverts, because this is, it seems very stark. And this is one example where it is very stark. And I think society tends to kind of, there's been research done that society tends to kind of favor extroverts because
squeaky wheels get the grease.
That's exactly right. And extroverts, you'd think like, oh, a good leader is somebody who, speaks up and is a bit, I almost said belligerent. That's not what I mean, but a bit like, boisterous and a bit more assertive is a good word, and dominant. So anyway, that there's this kind of misconception that one is better than the other. And in that moment, right, when you're in like a meeting and you've got one employee who's just giving all these answers and these solutions and another employee who's maybe quiet, I think people wrongly assume like, oh, this is a good performer and this one's not pulling his or her weight, when the reality is that the introvert might have better ideas. They just need some time to think through it. And, that's kind of one of the perks. We talked before about how a good balance of introverts and extroverts is how you have a great organization. And one of the perks of introverts is that they really do take their time to think about it and kind of touch the problem from all angles and figure it out. And then when they give you their opinion, it's generally pretty well thought out.
Yeah, I think about if you have an introvert that you're working with, are they being cut off at the pass before they get a chance to say what they think? And we've talked about this before, like give somebody a full 2 minutes, to express what they think. And it could be that this introvert has never had that chance before, right? So it may take them a little longer, but they need that space to get experience with that. Yeah. So give them a little extra time and try to tone down the impatience level. And that's going to help them work through how to externally process things with you.
Yeah. And that again, like those are all parts of their strengths, right? Which is that they generally are independent workers who don't need an entire team to be productive in their own way. Now, obviously every project is different, but they also don't typically require the approval of others or bend to peer pressure. So if you have somebody, I think there's like a pretty strong sense of self that some introverts have. I don't want to say all or most, but that comes with this is that they are, again, self-contained, and they are, like they're generally not like pot stirrers. Like you can trust them to withhold or keep confidential information to themselves, and they are generally very good listeners. There has also been some research done, I don't know how conclusive this is, but that they have higher levels of empathy because they tend to observe rather than just sort of speak. Yeah. And so again, like I think that if you are looking for insight, both types can offer very, very good insight. But I think if you're looking at your more like introverted employees and thinking, oh, they're not as go-getter or as,
don't overlook
excited.
The quote unquote shy ones.
Yes,
is kind
exactly.
Of the point,
or the thoughtful ones, the ones who are taking their time. Because again, I mean, and Shannon and I run into this a lot. Shannon works a lot with me and Owen, our boss, and Shannon will say things like, when Grace and Owen kind of get into a room, somebody has to kind of check it because I am definitely off the cuff. And I'm like, I have a great idea. What about this and this and this? And Owen's like, yeah, and this and this and this. And then Shannon will be like, okay, why are we doing this? Like, what's the purpose of this fun new idea? And I'm like, oh, I didn't think about why we're doing it. I just wanted to do it. And so that's kind of the value in introverts. And that's obviously one tiny example, but they are that like,
I think that's a
voice
tiny
of
example
reason.
in the extreme, but I think we can all see where that could happen even on a smaller scale in day-to-day conversations.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was an extreme example. But let's talk about how introverts work best. So again, if you have a good mix of introverts and extroverts and you're like, I don't really know how to cater to these people or make sure that to these people.
These people.
Ugh. To make sure your introverts
gross.
are sort of nurtured and you're making sure that they can live it to the best of their ability. Here are some tips. So make sure that your more introverted employees have sufficient downtime. And by that, we're going back to what we were talking about before, where if you have a lot of meetings, if you have a very busy office, if you have an open office, if there's a lot of peopling going on a day-to-day basis, make sure that your introverts have the time they need to kind of decompress and relax and not just do it outside of work hours, right? Like if you're counting on them to go home and do do that, take Shannon, for example, right? She was just saying at the beginning of the podcast that you're having a really busy week, right? Outside of work. You're just, you're having a lot of stuff going on and it's all good stuff, right? Like happy family stuff. It's all great. But when are you going to recharge?
Right.
And you're busy all day at work too.
And I think this is where it's be helpful to, we're not saying to coddle people, but to be respectful of their time, right? Or respectful of kind of their mood. So this is, right now I'm in a good mood. Things are going well. If I have to keep this up for 3 or 4 weeks, it's going to really wear on me. And it's helpful to work with people who are understanding of that, like, she's kind of having a tough time. Let's like maybe not throw 18 meetings on her calendar today. Let's do that tomorrow instead, you know?
Yeah.
Or if I have a space blocked off on my schedule, like if you need to weasel in 10 minutes, like that can be stressful, right? So I think introverts work really well with an idea of what their schedule is going to be. And yes, things change. And I think particularly in very high, like fast-paced, like high-volume hustle offices, this can be really difficult to do. But just understanding that, like, when you move at that pace for so fast for so long, introverts are going to need a break.
Yeah. I also think this is just important for awareness. You know, if you have 2 employees, one's an introvert, one's an extrovert, and one is maybe the performance is suffering, and you're like, but they have the same amount of stuff going on. Like, why can this one not handle it and this one can? Remember that like introverts require different things than extroverts. You're an extrovert. If your extrovert is super busy and has a ton of social engagements going on at work and outside of work, they are so keyed up and batteries are charged, whereas your introvert is exhausted. It's the difference between like running on a full tank of gas and a depleted tank of gas. And the one with a depleted tank of gas is going to need a bit more, right? So again, we're not saying coddle, but just have that awareness.
I've tried to take this into account when we're interviewing new people. And sometimes they come in and they'll have to interview over like a course of a couple hours. And you don't really know if that person's an introvert or an extrovert yet. And just give them like, hey, do you want to take 5 and like run to the bathroom, get a drink or something? That can go a long way. And I think that's a good lesson for just meetings in general.
Yeah, just be a compassionate human being. Also, one great way that you can sort of make sure that everyone's needs are being met is to offer some work from home flexibility. It is the way of the future. I know our boss, Owen, disagrees, but I think that, again, most companies now are set up to where, to some degree, you can work remotely. And if you can build that in for obviously not just your introverted employees, but people who, you know, need the time or want to take the time, I think clarifying like, hey, you don't have to be very ill, or you don't have to have a family emergency, or you don't have to have like some massive reason to work from home. If you just want to take a day to work from home, again, not a day off, but if you just want to go get some work done at home, like that's acceptable. I think
it's helpful to teach your employees to understand themselves and what works best for them. And if you can help accommodate some of that, all the better.
Yes, advocate for their own needs. It's always important. And then another way to make sure your introverts are working the best is that they're never put on the spot. So again, we're going back to what Shannon and I talked about, where if you have a meeting and you're dropping a bunch of stuff on an introvert right now, it's brand new information, and you're like, what do you think about this? You might not get the best answers that they feel most confident about. So make sure you give them adequate time to like research and prepare. If you're having a meeting, write an email beforehand and just say, hey, this is what the meeting is. Here's some context. Shannon loves it when meetings just pop up on our calendar with no explanation.
It's so fun.
It's your favorite.
You know what else I love is in the morning when I wake up and I'm still wiping the sleep out of my eyes and my husband wants to run over the 17 details of the day's schedule that we need to discuss and also what's going on with the budget, because I have a question about this thing and I'm like, oh no.
I just woke up.
I have no idea what you just said. Like we're going to need to slow down. I think that is a good lesson for the workplace as well, because some people do have a tendency to do that. They'll run in, we're all busy, and they'll just drop in. Yes. You know, they're already moving at a fast pace and they'll drop in and they'll say, okay, this, and this, and also remember this, and this, and blah, blah, blah. And like, if you need to do that, oh, that's cool. But then maybe like take a second, ask if you can follow up on that. Can I assign that to you? Do you want me to email that to you? That can be really helpful. Also consider who you're doing it to, right? Like if you do that to me, I think that's mostly fine. I'll probably forget something just because I am who I am. But Shannon, like I know for a fact that like if I'm going to do something to Shannon, I still am pretty guilty of like popping over and being like, hey, but if I need something from her, I've learned to like, you need to write it down and give her time. And I can't be like, hey, can I have this in 15 minutes? You know, that's just a workflow thing too. But anyway, just be respectful of who you're talking to. That may work with some people, but consider this as you talk or you think about your introverted employees or coworkers. Crushed it. Nailed it.
That's
going to be the pull quote for the episode.
Nailed it. Also, remember when you're dealing with introverts, not to take their silence personally. This is a big one. So again, hearkening back to that shyness, quietness thing where, sometimes people are just quieter and they're not shy and they don't not like you. They just are chilling and doing their own thing. and you don't need to read into it, and you can just kind of leave them alone.
Owen says, he's like, what's wrong?
Yes.
Is everything okay? And I'm like, I'm fine. Like, I'm totally fine. And I don't think of myself as being a particularly like,
I don't think you're an extreme introvert.
closed off person, but I think he is so far on the other side of things as an extrovert that he's like, wait a minute. Why aren't we partying right now?
Why aren't we talking and you're giving me all the answers?
Why aren't you smiling and we're just talking and like all that, and I'm like,
why don't you love all this peopling like I do?
I'm thinking.
Yeah. I think that's a good, you said I'm thinking. And another kind of a piece of this is to like, if they are being quiet and they're like thinking and they're like, I don't know. I think a lot of times an answer that I'll get from my introverted coworkers is like, I don't know yet, or I don't know. And for a bit there, I was like, oh my God, like, how do you not know? Just tell me something. Just like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
Like I was like, how? Because I always have an answer for something. But my answers are raw cookie dough. Yeah. And their answers is the whole cookie. It's already ready. And I'm like, here's half the cookie, whatever. So just be patient and circle back. If they're like, I'm not sure yet. If they don't have the kind of self-awareness to say, I'm not sure yet, but I'll get back to you, maybe give them some grace and say, okay, well, I'll give you some time to process that and I'll circle back.
I think it's also helpful for me, like if you really do want to know what I'm thinking about, like maybe I'm processing it internally, you would like me to process it externally, give me that as a safe pace and be like, listen, well, I know you probably haven't arrived at, a final opinion about this, but can you talk me through where your head's at right now?
Yeah.
And that can be a really helpful way of like, okay, this is a safe place for me to say what I think without committing to a final answer.
That's a great idea.
And that makes me feel like, okay, we're kind of getting on the same wavelength. That can be useful.
Yeah, I love that. Some typical careers for introverts. This is just in the blog post. It's not really super relevant to what we're talking about, but I just think that I just like it. It's like a fun fact. Some typical careers for introverts are IT specialists, software or mechanical engineers, accountants. I think all of our accountants are introverts. Maybe not Megan.
Here
but
they are.
Yeah.
Which is so funny because I think about them where my husband works. Well, no, that's not true. So he is a big extrovert,
Yes.
but I would say the people he works
He's like
with
the least
are,
accountant I know though.
Well, his degree wasn't in accounting. He
There
just
you
kind
go.
of landed in it.
It snuck into there. Graphic designers, which I think is funny because I think you and Jess are both introverted. Writers, LOL, because I'm not introverted. Editors, psychologists, content marketing managers, and artists. I don't know if I agree with all these, but it's what the internet said, and the internet is never wrong.
Thanks, Google.
Thanks, Google.
I love a good generalization.
It's our favorite. It's our bread and butter here on Standard Office Procedures. The Standard Office Procedures podcast is presented by Blue Summit Supplies. We're an online office supply store that puts you at the forefront of our focus by offering new career-building resources every single week. Sign up for our newsletter and visit our blog at bluesummitsupplies.com for free downloads, tools, and tips to make your job easier and more fun. All right, now let's talk about extroverts. So what is an extrovert? So we all know that an extrovert is generally the more talkative, boisterous, outgoing, people-oriented person. Same thing, they tend to recharge by being with people. They tend to thrive in active social settings, and they derive energy from this kind of interaction. So it's pretty much what you thought. Yeah. Like, I know that when I go without people for like a day, I hate it. Like I feel crazy. Like I feel, ugh.
I think that the pandemic was particularly rough on extroverts in a way. Like,
dark time.
I mean, I think it was tough for everybody. It was tough for me as an introvert because it's like, oh, this is a dream. No, everybody was home with me all the time and I was never alone.
No
but it was also very tough for extroverts because they were alone and they could not get out and go see different people. My husband struggled with that. I'm just using him because he's the number one extrovert. I know.
I think that's completely reasonable.
Struggles with that a lot. And then recently we had to quarantine again and he was like, oh no, I hate this. Like, I don't like it at all.
I think it's an interesting thing because it's weird to think about like how exactly do you feel? And I try to describe it when, like I tend to come into the office every single day that I can because I like to be here with people. And when I don't, if I was sick, I had to quarantine last week and I was home for a couple days by myself. And at the end of those 2 days, like I felt like hopeless.
Emotionally
like,
drained.
Yeah, the best word for it is like hopeless and like despondent and just depressed where I was like, what's even the point? Like I'm so alone and the world is moving on without me and I want to be where the people are. And then I started to sing Little Mermaid. I don't need to, you can do it. Anyway, so that's what an extrovert typically is. Again, talking about that dopamine receptors, extroverts tend to need more dopamine than introverts to feel happy. So they require that external stimulation to have that inner happiness, to a higher degree than introverts. They tend to show happier, like more positive outlooks than their introverts. And again, that's just externally. I'm not saying extroverts are happier than introverts. I just think that they externalize it more. And their strengths are that they tend to fill awkward silences. They bridge gaps between people, and they're very good at connecting with others. They're traditionally known as effective communicators. That I both agree with and disagree with. I think that anybody can be an effective communicator. I think that if you have a very vocal extrovert who is not super self-aware, that's a worse communicator. You know what I mean? Just because you talk more doesn't mean you're a more effective
I think that's the flip side of the coin, that there can be an introvert that's a very good communicator. There could be an introvert that literally does not know how to say what they think. And I think that's just, you're a good communicator, you're a bad communicator. But I think in general, extroverts are more used to, they have a lot more experience with just talking.
They're more likely to communicate, period.
Exactly.
Externally.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why they tend to end up in, again, like more like outward facing leadership positions, or, because they're very skilled in the art of persuasion. That's just like an extroverted thing, is they can kind of cheerleader, get people to do what they want them to do. You know, you can just get caught up and it's exciting. So again, that's a more extreme example of an extrovert. Most people fall somewhere in the middle.
Most of the major extroverts I know are also very charismatic.
Yeah.
It's that kind of leadership quality, that charismatic, like, here I am and I'm not sorry about it and I'm going to tell you all about it too. And I love that. Like, that is so much fun to be around. That can be really energizing for me as an introvert, because they do a lot of the heavy lifting for me.
Yeah. There's just like introverts, they definitely have their sort of like weak areas, but then they also have a lot of strengths. And you can see where the value would be if you have a team to have a couple of extroverts in there, that are just kind of like, vocal and excited and leading the charge to a degree. But again, keep in mind that sometimes they'll just talk for the sake of talking. I do it often. That's why I have a podcast.
I listen to you talk all day long.
I love that I have you for that.
I would love that.
So let's talk about how extroverts work best. So extroverts work best in kind of more social settings. Like I said before, when I have to work remotely from my house, I like it for about 20 minutes, maybe 2 hours.
20 minutes.
And then I'm like, well, I hate this now. So generally, if you put them alone or you put them on teams of one, or they're siloed, you might find that they struggle a little bit, or they're just sort of like unhappy with their jobs if they're cut off from connection too much. They also tend to like a sense of loyalty to a team or a group, right? So I just made a kind of a switch within our company from marketing to a different department, culture. And that department is just me.
It's a huge department of Grace.
I will not be moving my desk from marketing. I will not stop going to marketing meetings until I'm forced to, because the idea of just sitting by myself and doing work makes me want to weep for 100 years. So that's kind of an extroverted thing, where it's like they like to work on teams and feel a sense of loyalty to like their team. Yeah. Obviously in their company as a whole. So that's one thing. So they work best when they can externally process. This is so important. It's like the opposite of introverts. It's crazy. They're opposites.
It's so weird.
It's so weird how that
It's almost
out.
like even the words
it's
themselves.
Almost as if that's the whole point of this thing. But no, so I feel like I know that if something happens, or if I have thoughts, or if something, I'm trying to make a decision, if you just say, Grace, go away and go sit and make this decision by yourself, and you come check on me 2 days later, I will have made very little to no progress because I haven't talked to anybody about it. Now, if I can talk to Shannon and Jess and Owen and 17 other people, I will get to the conclusion at the end. And oftentimes, it's not even really about what the person I'm talking to is saying. I know that sounds bad. Right. It's about them listening and kind of helping me and coaching me get to how I feel at the end. I need other people to figure out how I feel and what I think about things. I'm very reliant in that way, which is, again, a curse and a blessing, because, you may think, in a meeting, if it's me and Shannon and Owen says, hey, what do you think about this? And I'm just answering and spitballing and have all these ideas and I'm saying all this stuff, and Shannon's sitting there, again, being more introverted and just thinking about it. In that moment, it might look like one of us is participating, one of us isn't.
Right.
But ultimately,
they're both participating.
And it probably takes us about the same time to reach the same conclusion, because I'm throwing out a bunch of half-baked ideas, like I said before, where Shannon comes up with one baked idea. And by the time I finish baking the thing that I've been talking about for 24 hours, we're at the same point. You know
what's so funny? Owen and I actually dealt with something this week, and it was something that I had already been kind of thinking about for a while and kind of throwing around in my head, and I hadn't really brought it up. And I was like, I'm not really sure where I want to go with this, and I want to get to the end of this before I take it to him. And he came and he was like, hey, have you thought about XYZ? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up because we're actually kind of at the same point now. You
that's
know,
good.
it's so funny how that works.
And I think that I like that you brought that up because I do think that as you, even if you're completely different, completely opposite, one's an extrovert, one's an introvert, the more you work together, you guys will learn each other.
Yeah.
And this applies to larger teams too, but you'll figure out like, okay, I know this about Shannon, she needs some time. Or I know this about Jess, that don't spring things on at the last minute. Or, I know this about Grace is, yes, she's going to need to talk to me for 30 minutes after I say this to her and ask her for her thoughts. Like I can't just say, hey, figure this out and get back to me. She's going to need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So you'll learn each other. Another way that your extroverts work best is, again, when they connect with each other. We kind of talked about that, about them working with other people. Don't leave them alone in silence for too long. I listen to a lot of music. If I had to sit in a quiet room, like I've seen, I have friends who work in like accounting offices, or I've gone and visited my ex-husband at his networking office where it's just a bunch of like tech people. It's so quiet and nobody's wearing headphones.
Nathan, my husband, constantly has his AirPods in with something playing, either music or a TV show or something on his phone, because he cannot, again, works in accounting, quiet hallway, can't stand it.
Hard pass.
He needs noise.
I do podcasts or I make Shannon talk to me several times a day. Another way they work best is when they are staying active. So they are wired for enthusiasm and they want to seek out activities and things and projects that make them feel like they're helping and they're busy. And, again, like if you say like, I just think that you have to kind of always keep them busy. There's a bit of like parenting a toddler to this one, right? Where it's like, you can't leave them alone for too long. And if it's quiet for too long, nothing good has happened.
Yeah.
However, if you see them coloring happily and they're singing to themselves, they're doing their best work. Again, gross generalization. I'm sorry if I've insulted you, but I am including myself in that. So just know it's
Well, I think, okay, so again, I keep using Nathan as an example. He works in accounting and he tells me all the time, like he considers himself a very process-oriented, task-driven person. He likes to go in, know what he's going to do, check, 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 and be done. You would think that would be something more introverted. But for him, I think it's that like I am engaged actively and I know what's coming next and I know who I'm going to talk to. And he needs those breaks during the day to go talk to his work friends and his work family. And that is how he gets through it, right? So like he does a job that you might think is, again, an accountant. We literally listed it as an example of a more introverted career. But I think he figures out a way to make it work for him. And he actually turns that more like task-oriented, process-driven stuff into a strong point for him, right? Does that make sense?
No, I think it makes perfect sense.
It's like constantly the wheel is churning and turning, and then he breaks it up with little bursts of connection
activity.
with people.
Yeah, I think that's a great example too, that like, I don't want you to feel like we're pigeonholing you or society's pigeonholing you into something, right? Like if you are more introverted or extroverted and you're like, well, I'm an introvert, so I could never be a salesperson. Like, yes, you could, you know,
could.
Introverted careers had writer listed there. Like I'm a writer and it's hard though, because it's a solitary endeavor, but I will say like, do what you want to do. You know, you're going to make it yours. But yeah, I think it's a great example of like Nathan is an accountant, but he's taken this more traditionally solitary career and made it into a Nathan thing that includes lots of things. Yeah. So typical careers for extroverts include, again, like I just said, sales representatives, politician. I think that was funny. A nurse, a public relations manager, an event planner.
PR.
Yeah, PR is like me. I can't imagine an introvert in PR.
Can you imagine? Actually, this was a big part of my job at a previous job, and I hated it. So I had to call strangers and sell things to.
I love calling strangers.
Oh, God.
Shannon hates talking on the phone, period. Lawyers, human resources people, teachers, flight attendant, actor. So you can see very like kind of like outwardly focused, connection based, people based careers tend to be more extroverted careers. But keeping in mind that no matter what you are, you can be whatever you want. I support you.
You are a precious, unique angel, and nobody is like you.
That's right. You're the only one of you, no matter what you are.
I mean, I think this is so true. Like I used to be much more of a classic introvert, and I think I have changed a lot. And I think that that's true for anybody. Like we said, would you say 70% of people are somewhere in the middle?
Yes, exactly.
The reason that we talk about these extreme cases and the extreme generalizations is because those stereotypes exist for a reason. I mean, they're rooted in
it simplifies the conversation.
Some sort of truth, right? And so just understand that there's a lot of nuance to all of this.
Yes, and like we said at the beginning, if you are introverted and you don't love public speaking, or you don't love big crowds, or you don't love whatever, like I don't want you to be like, well, I'm an introvert, I'll never be able to do that. Like that is not true at all. All of these things are soft skills. You just might not have a natural inclination or a natural comfort in doing them, but you can get good at anything if you just practice it and you work hard at it. Same for extroverts. If you're like, well, I'm just not like, I just get so uncomfortable in silence, or like I could never sit still for that long, or I could never do a work from home career. Like there are ways to change things and tailor them to you, just like Shannon was talking about with her husband, Nathan. Or maybe if you do take a job that's work from home and you love the job, but you're going crazy, go to a coffee shop, join some like young professional networking groups, or there are ways to tailor it to you.
We had a podcast about empathy, right?
We did.
I think that would be a really good podcast to listen to in conjunction with this, because I think all of this is a great practice in empathy. If you are an introvert or you are an extrovert, we may have given you a few nuggets of things you're like, oh, maybe that's kind of why I am the way I am, But I think more so it's learning about the flip side of the coin and people that are different from you. So I think, we've talked about empathy also being a very soft skill that you can practice and you can get better at. And I think kind of just understanding people that are different than you, introverts and extroverts, I think that is a very worthy way to spend your time.
I think that time with you is a very worthy way to spend my time.
I love being with you, my opposite.
I love being with you, my opposite.
This is the Grace and Shannon Show.
Okay, guys. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something, and I hope you love yourselves, and we will be back next week to party again with Shannon.
Let's party.
Bye, guys. This has been a Blue Summit Supplies production. Good job, Larry.